Okay, going to change the fork oil on my 1995 Enfield Bullet 500. I'm going to use automatic transmission fluid where I live here in Canada. Even though it can get pretty warm in the summertime, I usually do most of my riding in the teens or in the mid-20s. So it's cool enough that I want to use a lighter oil. Here's what I have laid out for the job. I just have an old ice cream tub for catching the oil. Got a 18 millimeter wrench. I've got just a hex key, an Allen key here for pushing up on the fork spring when I pop the bottom plug out of the fork. Got a wide blade regular screwdriver just for taking the top plug out of the fork. I've got a squeeze bottle here with a nice narrow end that has at least a 200 milliliter capacity, because that's what I'm expecting to put back in. And just a bottle of generic ATF here. Nothing special. It's not going to be subjected to the wear and tear that it would if it was in a transmission, so just a cheapo ATF. Okay. So first off, just got to remove the fork plugs from the top of the forks. I usually put the screwdriver in the center here and just give it a couple of good smacks with my hand or a soft mallet. Nothing hard, just enough to kind of make sure that the threads are loosened up a bit. These ones were pretty good. It's been a few years since I did this, but they weren't over tightened the last time I did it. So you just unscrew this, and you'll have to mess around because the grommet for the cabling and the wires that goes through the casket kind of gets in the way. So you unscrew this and you kind of finagle the plug out of the way. There is a rubber gasket underneath it. I've never had a problem with wrecking it. I've got hole punches and lots of rubber that I can make a new one if I wanted, but I've done this a couple of times, and this gasket, I've reused it ever since I had this bike new in '95, so it's done me good for the last 23 years. So anyway, so just continue on unscrewing this and remove it, and get ready to be able to fill it back up with the ATF. Okay, so now that I've got the top plug out of the top of the fork here, I usually just lay the wheel over towards the stop and just give it a little smack with my hand on the end of the wrench to loosen it up. This one's loose now, and then start working it off. Straighten it up, and I'm ready with my catch can here. Just start loosening it. If it falls in, I'm not worried about it. I'll just pick it up afterwards out of the oil. It's not a big deal. There we go. So you can see there's some oil running out. I'm just going to grab that. It didn't get full of oil, so that's pretty good. Put that to the side. But not much oil is running out. I'm not seeing a lot of water in it, which is good. So it's kind of dark. It's not black like used engine oil. It's more of a really dark brown. So it's in pretty good shape. So I'm just going to let that drain a little bit more. And I'm going to try pushing up on the spring inside with my Allen wrench and see if I can get the mechanism that's inside out of the way and allow it to drain the rest, because for sure I didn't get 200 milliliters out of this yet. I would guess I got maybe, I don't know, 40 or 50 milliliters, and that's it. Still kind of draining out though. So I'll just let it drain a little bit. See if I can get it with the short end. I'll just hold the fork so it doesn't move on me. No, that's not going to work. So I'm going to go grab my rag, and I'll clean that off, and I'll see if I can stick that up inside and loosen it up. So, as a bit of an experiment, before I try to push that rod up inside, because it's still coming out, it's a steady stream, very small stream, but steady stream, and it's starting to accumulate, definitely up to 100 milliliters here. So I'm just going to let it run out and see what happens. Once it stops, if it stops, then I'll push up on the rod, and if I don't get any more, then it's really a matter of just letting it run out slowly like this until you get the whole thing drained out. I kind of lean towards Pete's manual that says to push up on the rod. I'm fine with that. I want to see how much I can get out of this thing. I'm going to measure it and see how much did come out and what the difference was after pushing up on the rod, if any. So anyway, let's let this drain a little bit more, and we'll see what we get after it's stopped. Okay, so this is about how much oil it collected. Quite a bit. So I have this other squeeze bottle that I marked off the milliliters in. So let's pour it into here and measure it out and see what we got. Yeah, there we go. I was watching the bottle instead of the funnel. I almost overflowed it. There we go. Yeah, I'm not seeing any water in this, so that's a good sign. Hope it's the same for the other fork leg. And I'm not seeing sediments and really any dirt or any junk in there, so this is pretty good. Alright, so I'm going to call that it. So we go down and have a look, and we've got maybe 110, 115 milliliters. So I did this years ago with the fork oil, and if I recall, I used 30 weight oil, which is what I'm taking out, but I'm going to replace it with ATF. But I'm pretty sure I put in 200 milliliters, like the manual, like Pete's manual suggested. So there is definitely a good 75 milliliters still left inside the fork leg. So I'm going to try and push up on it with that Allen key. Hopefully that works. I don't want to damage it. I picked the Allen key just because it's blunt on the end rather than something sharper like a screwdriver. So we'll see how that works out for us. Okay, so on the right fork, I'm going to not try to compress the fork. I'm just going to let it sit. Even the other one, I've not put the plug back in on the left side. I've let the little catch can there just sit there, and it's just still dropping out. It's coming out in drops, just drop, drop, drop. So I'm just going to let it go until it's completely stopped. And I'm kind of going to do the same thing on this side and measure this side to see how much. If I get something that's similar in volume, then I'll feel a little better. I'm pretty sure I put 200 milliliters in, but like I say, it's been years, and I don't know, perhaps some came out. I've never seen any oil on the fork, so I don't know. But we're going to give it a try. So we'll take this guy out and do this one. So the same thing, it doesn't rush out, but comes out steady. And get that gasket, that washer out of there. And we'll let that just basically fill up and go and go and go. I'm going to measure this amount again in my little squeeze bottle. And see what we get. See where it ends up. Okay, so this is all the oil. I let it drain for about half an hour. All the oil out of the right fork that would just drain on its own. Measure it out. I did go back and have a look at the drawing for the fork. I've never taken these forks apart, but just between reading the instructions in Pete's manual as well as looking at the drawing, I see what he's talking about. And it isn't something you push up on inside. I made a mistake in my initial reading. It's actually pushing that tube up into the slider and allowing the oil to drain out around the tube. And then you got to finagle the tube, the inner tube, back down through the hole in the bottom of the slider. So I took my rubber hammer, my rubber mallet, and gave it some good whacks. I was really careful. I didn't want to damage the thread, so I used my rubber soft mallet, and the thing didn't budge. I'm going to try the right fork. That was the left fork. I'm going to try the right fork, but if it doesn't go up, then it's just going to be a matter of there's going to have to be some oil that sits in there. It's either that or take the entire fork apart, and that's something I'm not ready to do right now. So anyway, so let's see how much we got in here. We got a little bit more. We got about maybe 135 milliliters out of this guy on the right side. So we get a little bit more oil out of this side, but still not the 200 milliliters. So there's definitely some oil left inside those forks. And unless that tube that is in the center can be punched up into the slider and allow the rest of the oil to drain down, it's just going to have to stay in there, and I'm going to top it up. I think what I'm going to do though is I'm going to not add an entire 200 milliliters of ATF. I'm going to add up I'm going to put in the difference, what I've taken out. So in this case, about 140 on this side and 115 or so on the left side, and that's what I'll replace. And hopefully that'll give me close to 200 milliliters inside. If it's a little bit more, it's not a big deal. I'm a pretty big guy, so if the dampening's affected, then it's affected. Okay, so I finished the job. I put everything back. I never was able to get that tube to go up into the slider. I don't have a step drift, as Pete recommended in his Pete Snidel recommended in his manual. So I improvised a bit. I was really paranoid about the threads on the end of that rod. So rather than a stepped drift, what I did was I got this from my drawer. It's just a short bolt with a nut, and the nut just happened to fit over the end of the threads, and the bolt fit inside, so kind of like a step drill or a step drift. So what I did was held it up there with one hand and just took this time not a rubber mallet but a ball peen hammer and gave it some good whacks. You know, I didn't hit it as hard as I could, but I hit it hard enough, and the tube in the center of the slider still never budged. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to take this fork apart, both these forks off the triple tree this winter. There's a whole bunch of work that I plan to do on this bike this winter, and I'll just add that to the list. I've got to change out the front brakes, both tires. The tires are old and I need to replace them, so I've got a new set of tires for them. I've got brake shoes for both. So this wheel's coming off anyway. I might as well just continue the work and take the forks right off. And I am going to look at maybe drilling into the bottom of this. I'm going to do some measurements when I get it apart, but I might drill into the bottom of this and tap it and put in a drain screw, because this is just ridiculous. They should have properly designed this thing right from the get-go. Both the British originally and then the Indians had plenty of time to fix this and actually put a bloody drain on these forks. There's no reason to have to go through this. But anyway, we'll see what we get.